Okay, how's it going, man?
Yeah, it's going good, thanks, Ollie.
The world's changed a lot since we last spoke,
Yeah,
4 or 5 weeks ago.
yeah.
How has this happened? It's strange, very strange times. How?
Last time I was on off script, the biggest problem was the Johnson government. It was that long ago. We hadn't even had the election. Do you remember? It was autumn, November
Yeah,
2019.
different world.
The biggest problem we had to face was, strike action.
Yeah. It's sort of it puts in perspective like how the way we thought about problems before, dealing with something of this
Yeah.
magnitude, of this scale. It makes you think about everything a little bit differently. I'm sort of struggling just to watch like movies or to enjoy fiction, or because it's like it almost feels like it belongs to another world.
Mm.
Yeah.
Um, there was kind of a little post I saw on social media. It was joking, everyone wants to live through historical events. In your lifetime you'll live through things that everyone will talk about in the future. But no one ever wants to live through a bad historical event. Like it was meant to be space travel. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't meant to be a pandemic. The historical event was meant to be like landing a man on Mars, not 1.5 million cases, which I think it is today. Uh, so it's kind of that interesting. Yeah, this is our major historical event, I suppose. Kind of agreeing with what you were saying.
Yeah, there's this quote I remember reading a while ago, and I think it's from Lenin actually. And he said the quote goes something like, "Sometimes there are decades where nothing happens, and sometimes there are days where decades happen."
Yeah.
And I feel like we're living in those days now. Just the world has completely shifted the way we're thinking about politics and economics and globalization and all of this stuff, and even taking it away from sort of the broad abstract issues, and even just like in my everyday life, the way I relate to my family, community, just the way my
Mm.
little village is going about. It's sort of transforming everything now.
It's kind of a deconstruction of society, isn't it?
Yeah,
it
yeah.
it's yeah.
It's exposed. I do want to talk about the politics of it all and the economics. I
Mm. Let's
definitely
yeah.
want to get onto that. But before we get onto all that, I want to just talk about how you and your family's coping. It's a bit of a struggle for, at least for my family. We live in like a relatively decent sized house. We've all got our space, but still, as that, you do start a little bit stirring a few arguments. You got
Mm.
it's a challenge. So how are you coping? How are you and your family dealing
Um.
with being stuck inside?
So we're quite lucky. So we have a reasonable sized house with a decent garden. But also, more importantly, my parents are both ministers, so in church, and that means they're kind of borderline key workers because they're spending a lot of their day delivering food to people, coordinating lists for people who need to go to hospital. Um, so they and also because when they're in a church building, it's an entirely safe environment. It's just the two of them, so they are able to go out during the day, and it's just me and my sister who are both in the house during the day, and we're both quite solitary people. So I'm doing some studying, some working on an essay at the moment. I don't know what she's doing. She was making pancakes this morning. I think she's watching a lot of Netflix. But the point is, we during the day certainly we all have a lot of space to ourselves, and then we kind of have an implicit agreement that during the evening you have to be a bit more sociable and spend time as a family. So we all try and eat dinner together. I went on a run, my government allowed run with my dad yesterday evening. Um, it's kind of a bit more, but yeah, and my parents have been very good respecting my space as well because they kind of accepted. He's been 2 terms at university where he's got used to having very much his own space. So they much more than in year 12, year 13, they've given me a lot more freedom to kind of do what I want. Which
Yeah.
so it's definitely a positive, and I realise that we're much more fortunate than most families in the country right now, and so I'm quite happy.
Yeah.
It's a good situation in the Hunter household. It's fair to say.
Yeah. I saw this meme on social media recently, and it was saying something like, "Oh, that awkward moment when you realise your everyday life is called quarantine.
Yeah,
And it did sort of
that's.
speak to me a little bit. I am a little bit of an introvert. I do kind of like, sometimes I like, being nice and comfortable in my own home, but
Have you
this is
have you
sort of taking it a bit too far.
have you kept up the drinking every evening that we were having a chat about?
No, well, thank you for breaching our private messaging confidence. I've definitely morning. At first, I thought it was a very effective coping mechanism, but sort of the efficacy of that mechanism was declining exponentially. I've sort of eased off a little bit. There's still probably slightly too much drinking and slightly too much video gaming going on, but that's
That's right.
how we've got to make our way through. You might be working on essays and the like, and I'm playing FIFA. What kind of essay are you writing? Is that for uni?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not such a tryhard. I'm in the habit of writing personal essays. No, this is very much so it's for ethics, philosophy, and religion, which is my minor subject, and it's looking at kind of Gandhi and the Dalai Lama. So we just finished doing Hinduism and Buddhism, and how they incorporated their religious beliefs into their ethics and their actions. And so today I've been doing some reading on Gandhi, making some notes on that, and we learn a bit about Gandhi in school. But this guy, I've come to realize over the past day or so, is genuinely one of the most exceptional people, certainly in modern human history, but possibly in all history ever. Because this is a guy at the age of 77 who was still walking around barefoot, single-handedly stopping the massacres and the bloodiness of the partition of India when it was split into India and West and East Pakistan, as Bengal was then. And when violence erupted in Calcutta, Lord Louis Mountbatten had sent 50,000 troops in to try and stop the violence, but it wasn't working. And Gandhi went in with the intention of fasting to death as a kind of public condemnation of the violence. And within 3 days, both the Muslim and the Hindu extremists had stopped fighting.
Whoa.
Because the single-handed power of the man and the influence he had on contemporary Indian society was nearly absolute. And he was able, wherever he went, he would calm violence, and he would have fasts that attracted nationwide recognition. And he stayed entirely principled to his kind of teachings, to his belief in non-violence, civil disobedient non-violence throughout. And he's not just a good guy, he's not just you kind of bandy the idea, Mandela, Mother Teresa, Gandhi tend to be the sort of 20th century good guys, but Gandhi is probably in a league above those two. It's just something genuinely powerful, committed about what he did, and it did create change. He was seriously responsible for the decolonization of India, which it's fair to say is the biggest. It's worth remembering. Britain willingly gave independence in the biggest transfer of power in history. So consider never before in history had one country given 500 million people independence fairly willingly. Like, that's quite a weird way of looking at Indian independence. But back to the point, Gandhi is cool, and that's what I've been doing today.
His big thing was the non-violence thing, wasn't he? Because when he is often sort of lumped in, isn't he, with all those 20th century historical figures like Mandela you mentioned. He's sort of
Martin Luther King would be another.
Martin Luther King, but even people like Malcolm X and Che Guevara. But the thing that's particularly unique about Gandhi is his commitment to non-violence. This was this was a religious commitment for him, like a spiritual commitment.
Like Gandhi has very few black spots on his public record. Martin Luther King, you can talk about his extramarital affairs. Mandela, he was part of a guerrilla counterinsurgency movement, which is why he was in prison. Malcolm X and Che Guevara, obviously militants, but Gandhi, in about 70, 60 years of public service and public action, there's very few things you could pin on him and say that was unequivocally wrong.
Wasn't there something about the girl he married was underage, something like that? Does that ring any bells?
Yeah, I think that was an arranged marriage. if
Yeah.
memory serves me correctly. It wasn't. It's not something I've been thinking. Okay, it came up today. The reason I think, if I remember it right, just in the context, for whatever reason, in the context of the situation, it wasn't that unusual because
No.
This is the late 1800s, so there are kind of bigger contemporary issues in arranged marriage. So obviously today that would be much more of a concern for a public figure. Um, yeah, but again, it's still quite small compared to 60 years of walking around India barefoot. He spent 1926. He spent in silence, so he spent the year not talking
Oh,
at all. Um,
wow.
if you had to
I
communicate,
know a
he
few
wrote.
people who I could give that a shot.
Um, but yeah, that sort of commitment and
Yeah.
public protest.
Yeah.
And
I was actually, me and my family were thinking about maybe visiting India this summer. My family
yeah,
came up to the uni this January, and we were talking about maybe going. Maybe that'll be our holiday this year. I don't think that's going to be happening. You know, out of all the
yeah,
places being hit by the pandemic, India is probably one of the places I'd least like to be. You know, incredibly dense population, poor country in parts. You know, lots of people without access to the right medical
yeah,
care. It's like, have you seen the videos online of migrant workers in India being sprayed with like antiseptic chemicals? Have you seen the videos?
no, I haven't
Yeah,
seen that.
like
No.
terrible treatment of workers out there, but still just such a magical place. You know, such a crazy history, such a fascinating religion. Certainly a place I'd definitely like to visit in the future.
Yeah, it's because Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister, has kind of indulged in his draconian instincts and said, essentially overnight, we're going to have a lockdown.
Mm.
Having not prepared the logistics, having not considered the millions of migrants who will return from urban centres to go back home and jam the streets, having not considered the millions of people who live in slums and don't have access to sanitation, to food, to running water. You know, you can't tell someone to wash their hands to happy birthday twice if they can't get any water in the first place. So, and how long can the lockdown be sustained for? The Economist briefing this week, the newspaper, it was essentially about right now, you know, choices have to be made. It's a basic economic problem. There are finite resources. Um, right now, it is worth the economic damage to have people in lockdown, worth the social damage to have people in lockdown. But there will be a point where the number of deaths will be low enough, and the amount of damage to our mental health will be so high, the amount of damage to social cohesion will be so high, the amount of damage to the economy. And you can attack me for thinking about the economy, but consider the economy is responsible for the social cohesion and for the welfare and the mental health of the entire country. The point where the economic damage will be so high that we will have to accept thousands of deaths to get society and end the lockdown and get society up and running. And in India, the the social cost, because it's, as we've been talking about, slums and lack of resources, um, and the fact that it's still generally a working class society, is means that they will not be able to sustain a lockdown for long before people start going hungry.
Yeah.
And at that point, you have to say, okay, it's worth. We need to start. Or do you say reducing the death count is worth letting people die of starvation?
Yeah, yeah. Well, there seems to be some sort of confusion out there about the strategy and the lockdown strategy. You know, some people say that we shouldn't criticize the strategy at all because we've got a lockdown, because if we don't lock down, people are going to die. And if anyone ever suggests, no, we should relax the lockdown, they're accused of wanting to sacrifice lives for the economy. And
Yeah,
I, I can understand, I can empathize with that view to a certain extent, but at the same time, the economy is not just this abstract thing. It's like ventilators have to be paid for,
mm.
hospitals have to be paid for. There does.
Construction workers. Who's employing the millions of construction workers who can't work via Zoom?
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it seems to be like it seems to be sort of like a lot of lefty middle class journalistic types, people who can work from home, people who might be in like a fairly comfortable economic situation themselves, they seem to be the first ones to criticize people like construction workers who like have to go to work. They've got bills to pay, you know, they've got rent to pay, they've got children to support, and there's certain parts about this like snitch culture that's emerging that worries me, you know.
There's you're right. There's a kind of tussle going on between we shouldn't criticize the government because we don't know what we're talking about, and we should criticize the government because that's what makes democratic society.
Mm-hmm.
And we still haven't found the balance between the two. Where is it safe to criticize where is the point where it's safe to criticize the government without making judgments on virology, on public health that we aren't qualified to make?
Mm-hmm.
Do you see what I mean? Like, it is probably wrong if we make statements about how viruses work and how herd immunity works because we aren't virologists. But it's also probably wrong to say we shouldn't criticize the government at all because the government isn't perfect. It's going to be getting things wrong, and it is up to us as upstanding citizens to point those things out, not out of malicious nature, but out of a genuine desire to improve the government's response to this crisis.
And it worries me sort of handing the reins of government over to something of like a scientific dictatorship. And I know those are dramatic words, but we are effectively living in like a police state now. Like if you're going out in your car to somewhere that you don't need to be, you'll be fined. Like we've never ever lived in times like this. It's an incredibly draconian world we're living in now. And it's all being done because of the scientific medical advice. But as we've seen in places like Scotland, you know, with this the most senior medical official in Scotland going out herself and sort of flouting the rules, it's sort of like, oh, well, we don't want to be in a situation where it's one rule for thee, another rule for one rule for me, another rule for thee. You know?
Yeah, and Keir Starmer, this is quite a nice segue into Keir Starmer. But Starmer, elected Labour Party leader, said basically the day after he got the leadership, so what's the government's plan for exiting the isolation? And everyone thought, oh, that's quite a good question, that. What is the government's plan for exiting isolation? You know, for all the journalistic hubbub and democracy is dying, it's a police state. No one, that's a good question.
Yeah.
It is worth having a plan for how to exit isolation. And Starmer correctly noticed that. He didn't criticise the government. He didn't undermine them. He just said, let's have a plan for this. And the government, without acknowledging it, responded the next day. So with, you know, one of the headlines at the daily briefing was, we don't think it's yet appropriate to have a plan for exiting isolation.
That's fine. The plan. The plan is there is no plan.
Well, but that's fine. But at least they've acknowledged it. Yeah. Probably, maybe they would justify it by saying a plan would encourage people to start leaving or whatever. Maybe there is a plan, but it's secret. I don't know. But at least that's how government in a crisis should work. Calm, simple, pointing out what the government needs to do better without undermining its entire thing. So Keir Starmer didn't say, you know, we should go into a government of national unity and kind of niggle at the government's legitimacy. He didn't say, you know, the government has been wrong from the start and kind of undermine the public perception of the government. He just pointed out an area of policy, a kind of skin deep thing, without going any further, that could be better. Ideally, that's how democracy should work, really.
Yeah. I thought it's kind of a bit of a nice break to see Keir Starmer. He is a bit smoother, a bit more. There's a bit more professionalism associated with his leadership than I think Corbyn. And I'm someone who was pretty generous towards Corbyn, you know. But it is kind of nice to see someone like that at the head of the party again. But this is a phenomenon that's happening everywhere. Like I was listening to a podcast earlier with a political analyst who was suggesting that this pandemic is basically going to end populism. That because there's this when stuff like this happens during moments of national crisis, there's this he called it this rally around the flag phenomena. There's this sort of sense of unity and this social desire for stability, which inclines people sort of towards a more moderate political centrism. And so that might be why I found it more pleasant to listen to someone like Starmer as opposed to a populist like Corbyn, because he represents stability and normality in a sense.
That's an interesting judgment. I mean, Starmer is the first post-populist, so he's the first Yeah, he's the first of a generation of politicians who have seen out the populist wave, i.e., in this country, Brexit and Corbyn, and has come out the other side and is taking a senior leadership position.
Yeah.
So, just thinking about American politics, they probably don't have a post-populist yet. Trump is a populist. Sanders was a populist. Now he's
Sanders is
suspended his
gone.
campaign. Sanders is gone. Biden is a member of the old crowd. So he's the pre-populist.
Mm-hmm.
France, maybe Macron is post-populist, arguably, but that's a separate debate. But Starmer is definitely one of the first breed of post-populists who will have to navigate, who people who have realised that in this case, in the case of Corbyn, populism hasn't worked. He has not got the Labour Party into power. Therefore, they're swinging back, backing someone who's establishment without being pre-populist. So Starmer wasn't around before Brexit. He's a post-Brexit man. So people can see him as having a clean record, not having anything to do with the classic establishment while still being establishment. And so they put their trust in him.
Yeah.
Maybe this is a blip. Maybe he'll fail and Long Bailey will get into power. But certainly, in one sense, Starmer is kind of beginning to. So maybe there was already a post-populist wave coming, very quietly, very slowly, and possibly this podcaster was right in saying pandemics or global national crises tend to inspire a sense of pro-establishment feeling. But also, possibly, is it too early to tell? Because we can make speculations, but this is still new to all of us. So maybe it's also slightly arrogant, and I'm certainly guilty of this. Maybe it's also slightly arrogant to make predictions about how society will look after a pandemic, because in reality, none of us really know. We can make guesses.
It's too. We don't even know. We're sort of making predictions about what the world's going to look like after the pandemic. We're in the middle of the pandemic, and we don't even know when this thing's going to end.
Are we even in the middle?
We don't even know. I mean, I keep hearing reports in the media saying we've had the peak's next week, the peak's in 2 months. They've got no idea. They've got no idea the mortality rate of this thing. I've heard things from 0.5% up to 3%. All the statistics they're all skewed because, the statistics coming out of China are nonsense. We can talk a little bit about that, how the Chinese the World Health Organization, we can talk about some of the slipperiness associated with them. We just don't know. We don't know how this thing's going to unfold. We don't know the demands it's going to put on the health service. We don't know the full economic cost. There's some economists today saying this is going to be the largest economic hit in our lifetime. We're in uncharted territories. We've never had them. We've had pandemics before, but we've never put the global economy on halt. And that's perhaps what scares me more than the pandemic. It's the fallout from potentially the largest economic crash since the Great Depression.
Well, that's what the government is trying to do. It's trying to stop a recession, which is the economy getting smaller, from becoming a depression, where the fundamentals of the economy are knocked out of it. So my economics knowledge isn't the greatest. I did an A-level in it, but I can't go into real detail.
That qualifies us to discuss it.
But my understanding is, whereas in the depression, you had the destruction of kind of the markets, not just financial markets, but the housing market, the banking market. Basically, no one was trading. Properties were going on sale for nothing. There was no food coming in because of the Dust Bowl. In the recession, you just had economic contracting. People were nervous about buying and selling. Quite a few businesses were shutting up shop because they couldn't access capital. The difference being, just from having a period of nervous trading and shocks to the economy, as you had after the financial crash, and having a depression where the entire economy is, as I say, people aren't buying and selling at all. People aren't investing at all. There's no fresh liquidity and capital credit coming into the market, so people can't get loans to fund businesses. There's simply, house prices probably don't, but it's productivity. If productivity is cut, and British productivity is already very low, if productivity collapses, then we have a depression, because it's not just the economy struggling, the economy is falling apart.
Yeah.
and that is much harder to build. We don't actually know how to recover from a depression because in the Great Depression in the 1930s, it took a world war and the boom in armament spending to lift us out of it. Even Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal was only doing a partial job of helping America recover. So it probably could have taken about 10, 20 years to recover. So what the government is trying to do at the moment with its 600 billion spending plan is allow the economy, or not allow, but accept the economy is going to slide and it's going to get quite nervous and not do great, but stop the entire economy being swept out from underneath itself and try and preserve the productivity so that when people go back to work, we can go back to work at a level similar to back in early 2020. Does that make sense?
I remember back in 2016 when Brexit was happening and when Trump was elected, and people were making comparisons saying, oh, we're entering the 1930s. It's just like before the Second World War, all these populist, fascist movements. And I remember thinking, this is a little bit dramatic. You know, this is just Trump, Brexit. It's not really comparable to the 30s. But now I'm starting to think those comparisons might be a little more appropriate. You know, we're already seeing increasing tensions between the West and China. Those existed before the pandemic. They're
Mm,
certainly being inflamed now. Um, what do you
no,
think?
no,
Go on.
no, that's wrong,
What's wrong?
Ollie. You can get because no, that is unfair. There are parallels, but correlation doesn't mean causation. So
Hmm.
the Second World War, for instance, a global crisis in this scenario was caused by populism, by Trump. You know, the relevant Trump being Hitler or Mussolini or whatever. In this case, the pandemic has nothing to do with Trump.
Hmm.
Trump is not helping the world fight it, and no one is looking to the US for leadership. Excuse me. No one is looking to the US for leadership. But he's not played a role in causing the pandemic. In fact, Trump's damage has been bad, but not as bad as it could have been. If he was more competent, he could have wreaked far more damage to the global economy. But he's incompetent at being incompetent, if
I
that
suppose.
makes sense.
I mean, economic hardship fuels populism, though. That's what I mean. And I know that sort of flies in the face of what I was saying earlier about national crises causing people to move towards more establishment candidates. But I think that's only sort of a brief temporary phenomena. But then long-term economic hardship it forces people into the hands of extremists, and that's sort of what I'm worried with. After the pandemic's died down, when this economic crisis is fully sort of emerging, people are going to be looking to blame someone.
No,
And
I don't. I no. I think that's wrong.
what, you don't think people are going to
No,
blame people for
no one.
this?
No, you can't.
There's clearly people to blame for this,
Look, you can scapegoat the Chinese to a point,
not just the Chinese, like the global medical authorities, the political leadership of
but but but
the
but
United States.
but in a recession, the global financial crash, the markets went bang, the banks collapsed because of subprime mortgages. You can stand up and say the fault of this is Blair's New Labour, who let the markets run rampant without regulation. So you can vote for populists who promise to bring in regulation. You know, so David Cameron partly courted a populist kind of idea by saying, you know, we're going to make Britain strong again with austerity. We're going to undo this. You vote for someone who can undo it. If it's China, you can ride a surge of xenophobicism and populism so far, but there's a point where you're also kind of there's not so much people accept you can't do much about the World Health Organization. Not many people tend to win power on the basis that they're going to deconstruct the World Health Organization and stop those bad guys at the UN from stealing all our flu medicine. That's not a vote winner.
Mhm.
To say you've you've also mentioned in the same 10 minutes that both pandemics aren't going to cause populism and pandemics are going to cause populism. So it's a little bit
Yeah.
awkward critiquing both the arguments.
Because I don't know, Theo. I don't know, and it could go two different ways. This is exactly what the issue I was. This is what I'm thinking about at the moment because I don't know what direction it's going to go. It's because we're talking about xenophobia and people's attitudes towards China. And there's one attitude to this where you could say, no, this makes us realise we are all one planet, we're all connected, we're all responsible for each other, we've got to look out for each other, we've got to come together, we're appreciating now all the foreign workers that contribute to the NHS. You know, there's this sense that we're all one, and that could be a good positive direction to go. But there's another direction we could go, which seems like one that a lot of people might take, where they say, how did this happen? Who's responsible for it? Why is our medical equipment made in China? Why do they have such relaxed food hygiene standards? Why when this virus first emerged, did China shut down its own internal borders with Wuhan but didn't stop international flights? Those are super important questions that I don't think should necessarily be labeled as xenophobic.
No, but that easily bleeds into xenophobia. So you can be a technocrat.
It easily does.
You can be a young global citizen like we are, who have internet bubbles that reinforce the idea that international is good, and free speech and tolerance and love for all people, as long as they don't hate the LGBTQ community. But then that very easily turns into attacking the people of a country, attacking a nationality, attacking a race. So that's kind of a hill that I've found myself sitting on, and I've completely forgotten what I was actually meant to be arguing. This is a problem, Ollie. You spin me into little circles of arguments, and I entirely forget what I'm meant to be doing. You're so interesting to talk to. I sort of get lost in this maze of ideas. I work things by talking out loud. So basically, I can start saying something, as I did earlier, and realise halfway through what I'm saying is wrong, because that's kind of how
What were we talking about before I took you down this?
Arrogant. I've been a hypocrite, because I've said you shouldn't say something's going to happen after the pandemic, because we don't know, and then this is going to happen, and this is so. Probably need to admit to that one.
Yeah, your audio dropped off a little bit there, but were you basically saying we shouldn't make any predictions about what's going to happen after this?
Yeah, that's hypocrisy. I was criticising people who are making post-pandemic predictions, and then 2 minutes later, I was making post-pandemic, post-populist predictions.
Yeah. What do you think the sort of response is going to be? Do you think we are going to see this? Because I've told you I don't know whether we are going to go down this xenophobic route and blame China, and there's going to be this process of deglobalization. We're going to ask ourselves, why do we make so much medical equipment in China? Do you think we are going to go that route, or do you think we are going to go down the route of thinking we need more global cooperation, we need to stop looking at the US for leadership? What do you think sort of the fallout from this? I know you don't want to. You don't want to, and it's very hard to predict what's going to happen after the pandemic. But how do you think it is going to shift the way people think about politics?
People will be so happy to get back to their lives that it might not make any long-term difference.
Okay. I beg to differ, but we'll see. I hope you're right.
Having spent months in isolation, do you not think that, frankly, the world would be so happy to go out to work and to play football in the park and go for picnics at the beach, that they won't be thinking about how to reform the international health system?
I hope you're right. I hope it is just one big, and there certainly are going to be a lot of massive parties out there, which hopefully I'll be participating in. People go having the picnics and nightclubbing, and we're going to have to remember how to be social again, which for me was a challenge even before this pandemic. But I'd like to believe that rosy picture of everyone sort of emerging from the houses and hugging and touching each other for the first time. But I think the reality is they're not going to be. They're going to be coming out of the houses into an economy which is fallen apart, and lots of people laid off. Businesses are collapsing now, and there's going to be a lot of jobless people out there in a bankrupt economy saying, who's to blame for this? Who's to blame for this? But anyway, I think we differ on our perspective, and we simply don't know. We simply do not know. What do you think about Boris Johnson?
Him getting ill?
Yeah,
Quite quite worrying. When
yeah,
I
really.
heard the news, it was quite a shock.
Yeah,
Certainly, yeah, it's given the country a bit of a jolt. I think possibly other world leaders have been a little bit woken up by it. Perhaps it's not it's not normal for a prime minister, a politician, to be so deeply involved in any way in a national crisis. So the fact that he's got ill, just as everyone else has been, is quite an interesting sort of stark humanisation of him,
hmm,
and probably it's making quite a lot of other world leaders a bit more nervous, and perhaps that's not a bad thing.
yeah. I think it's a real symbolic hit as well. You know, he is such a big character, such sort of, he is charismatic. Because I know a lot of people out there like to sort of hate on him, but he is. When I heard the news, I felt bad. I was like, oh no, because he is such this. He's like a big figurehead, and for him to sort of,
Mm.
for him not to, it was bad news when he was first diagnosed with the virus, and then he kept putting those videos out on social media, and he was sort of progressively declining. He was looking rougher and rougher, sort of like me getting progressively more hungover, but um,
I'm gonna keep drinking. I'm
uh,
hungover. The way to get through it is more alcohol.
well, there's no consequences for being hungover. You wake up and it's like every day's a recovery day, you know?
I see. Yeah.
um,
Although
but
you're
yeah, and
right.
then it was bad news when he was admitted to hospital, and now he's on intensive care, and it's just, I'm very worried that, you know, if it does get any worse, it can't get much. Do you know what I mean? If the headlines keep getting worse for him, there's only a limit to how bad it can get. And if the worst were to happen, I think that would just be such a blow for the national spirit.
Yeah, it would be tough. They're saying kind of on the news. I'm just having a look now. His health has continued to improving. Um, they've not put a very flattering photo of him on there.
I'm sure
Uh,
he's upset about that.
yeah, it would be certainly. Yeah, it would be tough. It would be a blow. Um, I said a little prayer for him the other night,
Oh,
um, because it's important to, as you say, kind of politics has been suspended. Normal service will be resumed after COVID-19 is over. So it's important that we have our national leaders and our national figures. Um, and
have I
I, I hope he gets better, certainly.
So do I. So do I. And it just, I don't want to spend much time talking about this, but it just kind of dispirit me when I see people on social media wishing him ill. You know, I don't know if you've seen
Oh,
that. I don't.
really? No, no,
Yeah.
that's horrible.
Fortunately, these people are clearly in the minority, but I think a lot of people are, you know, because the thing about this virus is, if anyone gets it, even if it's like your worst enemy that falls ill, someone that you hate, and someone that you might wish ill to, even if they fall ill, there's still the threat. They become a carrier of the virus, and they become a threat to everyone else. So that's what sort of.
And and more fundamentally, Ollie, you should never want anyone to die.
Well, you are right,
That
Theo.
that
You're
that's
you're a
more.
Christian, aren't you? You're a good person. A lot of
I'm
people are.
Ollie. I think right. I think you're kind of putting me into a little box. I think most people. I think you're in a minority. Most people are in favour of even their enemies not dying.
I,
That's war is possibly the only coherent uh, contrast with that. That people not dying is a positive, and I refuse to be labelled as a good person for thinking
I
that.
think we both feel that way,
I'll
but
do it.
because we both, I think life is good. Life is good. I want to protect it, but I've met some nasty people out there, and not everyone thinks in the way we do, which is the right way.
Mm.
Yeah. You know this. Have I ever told you about my friendship with Rishi Sunak?
No, you haven't.
Have I
That's quite
not?
interesting. No.
He used to be. He used to be well, he still is MP for Richmond, which is
Yeah.
very close to where I live. It's William Hague's former seat. And
Oh,
last
do
year,
you live in London way?
huh?
Do you live down London way?
No, Richmond's up north. It's in Yorkshire.
Oh, well, there's a bit of London called Richmond on
Oh,
Thames.
right.
So I just got confused. Right, sorry.
His
Yeah.
seat is up north. It's a really nice little town with a big castle, Richmond, and it's William Hague's former seat. And I
Oh,
live about
that'd
10,
be
20 miles from there. And I used to work at a pub, a nice, quiet little B&B village traditional pub, before I came to uni. And he popped in. He would come in like every 2 or 3 months. This was just when he was a junior minister, and we weren't on first name basis, but we'd come in and we'd shake hands and we'd sort of like, hello, how are you? Hello, how are you? And he
Is
came in
that his
with like,
accent?
no, that's my accent when I'm pretending
Okay.
to be posh. He'd come in with his wife, who's the daughter of like one of the wealthiest men in India. He came in one
Yeah.
day with like the editor of the Sun, or the political editor of the Spectator. So he came in with all these journalists, and they're all sat around this table. And I remember when he came in that day, and there was about 5 or 6 of them. And the landlord said to me, he said, Ollie, I'm just going to deal with that table. Don't you go anywhere near them. I want to look after them. I want to make sure everything's perfect. So you just don't go anywhere near them. And I was like, all right, that's fine. I don't want to be held responsible for messing anything up. And then so I'm focusing on all the other customers. And then I'm walking across the restaurant, and Rishi calls me over, and he's like, "Oh, we're ready to order. We're ready to order." And I was like, "Oh no, I'm not supposed. Oh, I don't know." So I had to go over. I couldn't say sorry. Like I'm not competent enough to serve you. I had to take the table's order, and I was so nervous. I was writing everything down like perfectly, making sure I didn't mess up anyone's order. And then the landlord was like, "You've got the order right, haven't you? You haven't messed anything up." And I was like, "Yes, yes, 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 yes." And thankfully, it all went to plan. But
Little did you know, in the Sun the next week was the political editor at this horrible little pub. We were served by the runtiest waiter in Middle England. Got our order wrong repeatedly. Served us the weakest ale on tap. No, that wasn't it.
your faith in me.
No, sorry, you were saying.
But it was an excellent meal, I have to say. Everything went swimmingly. He had a very pleasant meal, and he came back in several times. So, but it's weird seeing him on the telly now in this like position of leadership during
Oi,
this crisis.
you're the chap from the pub.
Literally, it's like, especially because he's like Chancellor of the Exchequer. He's like one of the most senior positions, and he's
Yeah.
announcing these 330 billion and up 80% of people's wages, all these crazy economic measures, which who the hell would have predicted this to happen? And I feel that often we think of politicians as being different, like not even human, like some weird alien that exists in 10 Downing Street, the Westminster bubble. And I mean, it's weird seeing any politician or any public figure in real life, but for him now to be at the heart of this crisis, it's kind of unnerving in a sense, because it's like, oh, he is just a fella, he's just a
Mm.
normal guy. He's not one of these David Icke lizard people from another dimension who's come to rule us. He's a human being, and he's flawed. And I support what I think the government's doing. I support them. I support them. I support it all. Especially, supporting workers. But it's unnerving. It's how vulnerable and fragile society is.
Certain. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah. What do you think of? We talked a little bit about Sanders earlier.
Yeah.
Talk about the US. What do you think of? Is the election going to happen? Firstly, what do you think about that?
That's a good question.
Do you think it should happen?
Do I think it should happen? Can't say. Don't know where the pandemic will be. Probably they'll need to make a decision by summer, so they have time for campaigning. So I can't say whether it should happen.
Mm-hmm.
Trump will try and I'm will bet that Trump will try to rig it, push it back, maneuver it his way. He'll probably be stopped or blocked or whatever, but he'll try. Sanders is out, which I'm not mourning over. I'm one of the few people in Berg FM who doesn't back Sanders. I am, if I had to choose between Sanders or Biden, I am pro Biden.
No way. That's crazy.
Sanders wouldn't get the votes. He
Are
wouldn't.
you
He wouldn't.
joking?
No, I'm not.
Sanders
This,
would beat Trump. He would have beat him in 2016, and he would have beat him this
No,
time.
no,
The
because
polling clearly suggested it.
the swing seats are no, because the swing seats are suburban. So suburban, middle class families, generally middle aged parents. They're the voters. They're the swing voters. They were voting Republican because Republicans promised them lower taxes. Now they're voting Democrat because the Democrats align with the same values they have. Okay. Sanders doesn't have a hope in hell with those guys because he's promising fundamental change. He's promising probably higher taxes, and they know that. He's promising completely reinventing the US. If you are a reasonably well-off, middle class, middle American, why would you vote for someone who is going to do all that when you could vote for someone who you don't like their values, but actually Trump's day-to-day impact is limited? If you're in the private sector, Trump tax cuts mean you're getting loads more money. If you work in a private sector, then Trump barely touches your life on a day-to-day basis. You would vote for Trump if it was Trump or Sanders. If you vote for Biden, you get neoliberal policies, which is kind of supporting the lifestyle you have. And Biden has the values you align with. He's a bit senile, he's a bit quackery, but on a day-to-day basis, he doesn't touch your life. So Biden
He can't talk.
That is admittedly a drawback. Yeah, I'm not dying on that hill.
Drawback. It's a fundamental part of that role.
I'm understating it, dude. I'm not dying on that hill. But at the same time, can you not see the argument? If you're a swing voter, if you just choose between Trump and Sanders, I don't care what the polls say, they're wrong. If you have a choice between Trump and Sanders, you're going to vote Trump. Trump upholds everything you have worked for and earned. Sanders threatens, with his weird rhetoric and his noisiness, threatens to destroy all that. Can you not see that? Whereas Biden represents.
Do you think it just comes down to those middle class? How did you describe them?
That middle class suburban.
Yeah.
That's where because the Democrats have a stranglehold in the cities. Trump has the rural areas. To flip the House or to hold the House, the votes this year, because of the weird way America does its elections, it kind of, unlike in the UK, it has its states and its districts voting every couple of years. So you have off-year elections and things.
It replaces a third of the House every 2 years. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. But because of the way the seats are stacked this year, they're leaning Republican. So you need someone who can convince Republican voters and those swing voters that he's trustworthy.
Right.
Sanders wouldn't do that. We know this. For every person, for every young white guy who embraces Sanders, there's a Trump voter who hates him and a middle class voter who would normally vote Democrat but is now going to vote Trump or stay at home.
You are upsetting me, Theo. You're upsetting me a great deal because I threw my full backing, which I know means a lot, behind Andrew Yang, and you were quick to reassure me how ridiculous that backing was. And now I'm suggesting
like something I'd say. Yeah.
And now I'm suggesting that Sanders would be a better alternative to Trump, and you're totally just devastating that idea. And on top of all that, you're backing a man who struggles to speak against a buffoon like Trump. I thought it's just what a depressing state of affairs.
Don't tar me with that brush. You said the question I'm answering to myself is who would do better, Sanders or Biden? I think Biden, because he appeals to the voters more. I never said anything about his eloquence. That is not my issue to deal with. That is very much the Democrat National Convention problem. You can criticise that all you like, but it ain't going to have a difference on me.
You're thinking that these voters are going in and looking at all their policies and really thinking, oh, what do these people represent? What are they going to change? But people don't vote based on that. People vote on how people speak and how they present themselves, and that's a fundamental challenge for Biden. And a challenge for Trump.
That's a false dichotomy. You're presenting me with two options, neither of which are perfect. I know the rules of impromptu podcasting debate. Don't try and trap me with them. Basically it's a mixture of the two. Voters will listen and watch Biden and Trump. Yeah, Biden. Yeah, his eloquence is poor. He has been improving. So in the last debate, he did reasonably relatively well. He was meh, okay, and meh is better than bad, okay. At the same time, you're also working out what they're saying. So for Sanders, everything Sanders says is reform, change, tear down, um, overhaul, destroy Trump. That's not positive language. That okay. I mean positive in the sense that like it doesn't encourage you if you've got stuff to lose. If you're a home owning, maybe you've got some shares in the stock market, um, you're happy with life. What Sanders is saying doesn't appeal to you. Okay, just listening to the CNN at 9 in the evening, whatever, you get that so short sound bites from Sanders' campaign. And Sanders isn't a great presenter either. He's just loud and expressive. He's not. He's not Blair. He's not even Cameron. He's just noisy. He's good, like Corbyn, good on a campaign, terrible kind of when it comes to actually looking good on the stage. Um, so so a lot of voters will consider the policies or will compare, Green New Deal to kind of some overhaul of the Medicare system compared to whatever Trump's platform is. So I think you're setting me up to fail there because it's halfway in the middle, and people put stock by both, but also even both options then are more nuanced than you make them out to be. So I'm actually trying to demolish your case for Sanders once again, because people who support Sanders don't understand bipartisan politics and don't understand. They're noobs, basically. In this
I'm not a noob. I refute that.
Because I, in my arrogance and greatness, could never be a noob. I'm too perfect. But that's why I think Biden is better than Sanders, certainly.
Yeah, it's almost hard to have the discussion because I feel like we can talk about politics in a pre-pandemic world and a pandemic world. Like I feel like it shifts things so fundamentally that it's hard. I mean, obviously, if Sanders was still in the campaign now, if Sanders had the nomination, the rhetoric would completely change, and it would be less about overhauling the system, and it'd be less about a political revolution. It would be more about guaranteeing healthcare. There'd be a much greater focus on that.
And that's not to say I don't agree with Sanders. I mean, socialising healthcare, fair enough, quite right. The pandemic had brutally exposed how useless, I want to say a rude word, but I'm not going to. Useless,
just going on YouTube.
How useless America's healthcare system is. And how important it is that we have progressive, certainly in state, how important progressive, environmentally friendly welfare net is. I think Biden moves some way towards that, but Sanders has the full package. The argument is, however, that there's no way Sanders could implement them. He couldn't get them through the House. Biden might be able to. But Sanders is certainly right in judging how devastated the American healthcare and welfare system is. And seriously, that's what they need right now.
I was watching this, you know who Andrew Cuomo is, governor of New York?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's giving because New York's basically become like a hotspot for this. So I've been following some of what he's been saying, and he was saying the other day, he was giving like his daily briefing or whatever, and he was saying how this is how insane the healthcare system is in the US, that all the states are sort of bidding for the ventilators, and they're all pushing the price up. So New York's bidding, and then California's bidding, and then Florida's bidding, and they're all he literally described it as like an eBay sale, and all the states are pushing the price up, and then FEMA gets involved, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. So then the federal government gets involved bidding. So not only are all the states bidding for these ventilators and pushing the price up, but then the federal government gets involved and starts pushing the price up. And if anything sort of highlights the insanity of that system, it's that. Crazy system.
There's nothing to say.
The thing that's uniquely challenging about this crisis for the United States is that the US is very they don't like big government. They sort of reject that. They're very individualistic. They're very they're sort of nowhere near as sort of collectivistic as we are in the United Kingdom or in Europe. And so this challenge, because it demands that kind of united national effort, I think presents a uniquely challenging problem for the US, because it's so against what they've got to do, flies so against their instincts.
Yeah, I mean, certainly they've got a stronger sense of community and self-reliance. That's the great thing about America. So in a disaster, people immediately start picking themselves up and helping them and their neighbours out. So,
You also start buying guns en masse.
Ollie, come on. This is going somewhere, right? You can't
All
be
right, go on.
jumping in with negative, bad person statements like that.
Sorry.
But the people are initiating local neighborhood responses to this virus. Americans are being Americans. They're being entrepreneurs. They're being initiative takers. They're being thrifty and hardy and smart. Bringing communities together to respond, whether that's driving and providing supplies, whether that's working, building ventilators, whether that's working out how to respond to the crisis. They're doing what they do best, but they're not doing it at a federal or state level. They're only doing it at a local level. At a federal level, authority is absent just when it is most needed. We don't really have that in Britain. We have public service and public duty, and we've got a great volunteering tradition. But if the electricity goes down, you don't work out what's going on and try and fix it and get a generator out to provide power to all your neighbours. You huddle in the dark and phone the electricity company and tell them what they're doing wrong and that they need to sort it out. In America, genuinely, if there's a snowstorm, everyone starts shoveling everyone's paths and driveways out, getting the road clear well before the snow clears come through. Everyone starts providing for each other. They conceivably would be getting generators out to provide for each other. We don't have that in the UK. What we do have in the UK, as you say, is big government, or big enough that it can coordinate a national response to this issue. But that's the contrast with the United States, is when they need, they're so much better at the local stuff, but right now they need the big stuff. And it's void. It's a vacuum. It's Trump going to a testing centre wearing a Make America Great Again hat and falsifying statistics and refusing to wear a mask.
Yeah. We're bringing the conversation sort of back to my little humble abode and my family's response to it. We are sort of my dad he's for my entire life he's had this sort of like awareness of how fragile the system is. He's sort of a little bit into he's into conspiracy theories a little bit, my dad.
Yeah.
And that sort of gives him this distrust of authority. He has this desire to be independent and to be free from it all, to be self-sufficient. So he's in response to this, he's basically turning our garden into a massive allotment. We've got potatoes in and carrots and mushrooms and coriander. We've got
Brilliant.
all of this stuff growing in our garden. But
he also,
well, they're all just seedlings at the moment.
Okay, right.
He's planning for like the very, very worst. He's kind of freaking me out a little bit. Like if I'm having to live off his potatoes, we know things have got really bad.
Yeah.
But he sort of after we saw all the Americans going and buying up guns and arming themselves, Dad went online and just out of curiosity thought, let me go and have a look and see how much crossbows and longbows are selling for on Amazon. They're all sold out. You can't buy one. You can't buy any crossbows or longbows.
I love the money. Everyone's had the same idea. Relive Agincourt. Get your old Welsh longbow out. Oh dear.
So sorry.
My granddad's a little bit, not quite conspiracy theorist nutcase like your dad with a lot,
I never said nutcase.
No,
I never said nutcase.
No, I'm sorry. I've offended your dad. I apologise, Mr. Chris. But my granddad's the same, and he's quite a libertarian. To the point where, having started a Clark's son in Bromley in southeast London, he was head of Unilever in Holland for several years and set up a consultancy for business. So he's fairly a self-made man, but he's really libertarian. He refuses. He's probably a tax avoider. Like I'm willing to put a small amount of money on the fact he is probably running his tax through the Cayman Islands, running his money through the Cayman Islands so that the government can't get hold of it.
Probably being the key word there. Probably.
But he's not an arrogant arsehole. He set up charities that have raised millions and built buildings at Royal Surrey Hospital. Right? He basically self-raised the funds for a urology centre. He set up a charity that provides art for people with epilepsy and sells that art so that they're making money. but he just hates the government and just entirely distrusts it and refuses to let them have his tax, which is a substantial amount of tax. Like, it's enough tax to do quite a lot of people quite a lot of good. But he's probably not giving it to them.
Why don't you start growing stuff in your garden?
Well, have we or would we?
Oh, why? Yeah, why not?
It's a lot of effort, man. I'm too busy calling you.
Doing the really important stuff.
Yeah, they're talking about how the world's going to end.
They have said that apparently we need 70,000 foreign workers come into the country every year to sort of work in agriculture and to harvest all our crops for us. And they have said that if all these travel restrictions continue, we're going to need 70,000 volunteers to go and work on the fields and pick the food. So
yeah,
that's starting to become, I mean, that's a little scary in a sense. I was reading something in The Independent the other day warning about possible power cuts, and obviously
it's The Independent though. Do you know what I mean?
What's wrong with The Independent?
They have about 30, and I know because I have an ad blocker that counts them. They have 34 adverts on their page at any one time. Any company that has over 5 adverts on their page at any one time can't be trusted. And The Independent has 34. Right? It's not the amount of adverts they put on there. I can't trust them. They're making too much money off of reading poorly sourced articles. No respect for The Independent.
I appreciate any publication that's not behind a paywall. Do you pay for any?
Fair enough.
Do you pay for any? Because all of the good ones are behind paywalls.
My granddad paid for me to get it. The same granddad, tax avoiding granddad, is funding an Economist subscription for me using his tax evasion. But so I don't personally pay for any news behind paywalls, but that's my main source of high quality news. I read the Guardian opinion articles quite a lot.
That's all free though. That's not behind a paywall.
Yeah,
they just beg for money.
Yeah, they're making a profit. They're breaking.
Are they?
Yeah, they were about 5 years in the red, and they're finally going into the black. So that's quite cool. So I might start paying because I read the Guardian articles a lot. I don't tend to read their news stuff. Yeah. What do you pay at all?
No, I don't pay for any of it. I do like the Guardian. I get them all through my my Facebook feed. Most of them. I like most of them on Facebook, and then I just get a huge diversity of them.
You're setting up an echo chamber. That's what you're doing.
Well, it's a pretty good echo chamber. I'm happy in it, and I think I get a pretty diverse range of perspectives. And I listen to lots of left-wing podcasts and right-wing podcasts. So apparently, I've heard that the New York Times is the only thing that's keeping that paper going is its podcast. You know, the Daily. Have you listened to it?
No, I only listen to one podcast irregularly, and that's Talking Politics, and it's very good.
Is that
I recommend that? David Runciman.
Yeah, I've heard of that one. Who run? Is that like is it its own thing or is it run by?
It's an independent. It's by David Runciman, who's a politics professor at Cambridge University, and he's just very smart and very insightful, and he has quite high-profile guests on. And you always think you've read or understood a story to death, and then he uncovers another layer of detail to it that you could never hope to get, and it's really interesting and really stimulating. So I'd recommend you junk all your podcasts and just listen to that one, Talking Politics. Yeah, it's well interesting.
Awesome. We've been going for over an hour, Theo. We've talked a lot about politics, but just to sort of wrap this thing up a little bit. What do you think about bring this closer to home a little bit? What do you think about the uni's response to this? Do you think they're good informing students? Do you think we should be more sympathetic to them because they're dealing with the same information we are? What do you think about rent? I know I'm throwing a lot of stuff at you here.
Yeah, no, it's something that's been knocking around, of course. The uni's response hasn't been excellent. It has not been great. But at the same time, that's comparing it to a handful of universities whose response has been very good. So quite a lot of universities, I think, are in the same boat as Lancaster, in quite a fragmented, awkward response because this is unprecedented. You know, they hadn't planned for this scenario. Probably they should have it's wise company management do some disaster planning, and hopefully in future they'll learn from this and kind of have fallback plans and things. But the university's response, so the university's response, in my opinion, hasn't been the best, but it's also not been as bad as it's been played out to be. A lot of organisations, a lot of businesses are in a similar situation, and it's quite fair to be cross with the university, because as with rents, as with tuition, there has been quite a lot lost or is being lost, and that's fair. It's reasonable to be frustrated, but also perhaps as a student body we should be more patient than we have been and more understanding. In terms of rents, it's a hard question. I don't know the university's finances. I don't know how much they need the rent. Because genuinely, if the university is going to go into debt without the rent, then there's maybe a fair case to be made that they ought to be able to get some of it at least. At the same time, there's a lot of people for whom rent's quite a lot of money, and they need the maintenance loan to help them last through the summer anyway. On the other hand, because there's got to be a middle
I think it's
way.
good. I think it's good that they've cancelled most of the exams. Especially for.
Yeah.
I know you've got your essay going on now, so there's some assessments still taking place. But
Yeah.
I think for the most part, it's good. I would find it incredibly difficult concentrating on an exam in times like this. Very, very, very challenging situation. My understanding is there are some exams which you may be able to take in August. I haven't looked fully into that, so there is sort of the opportunity out there for some students who might have been relying on their exams to pull their grades up. There might be an opportunity for some of them, which I think is a good thing. But at the same time, as someone who sort of puts everything into an assignment, I try to do it consistently throughout the year. I would be happy if my grades were based on how well I've done so far. That's just me personally. But the rent is a huge deal for me. I don't think they should be charging us rent. I think it's really wrong. The university's closed. We'd be breaching government advice even attending the accommodation. All the facilities on campus are closed. There's no face-on-face lectures. I think the contract is clearly it's null and void, and it's not our responsibility to care for the university's finances are the university's finances, and they're demanding a lot of money off students for in the middle of a crisis like this. I just think it's very I don't think it's the right move. I think it's wrong.
That's fair enough. I'm in quite a privileged position, is where my finances have been concerned. My parents have money to support me with. I've been quite frugal over the years, so I've got quite a lot banked. So yeah, it's quite fair. That's fair enough, and there's not much I can say to that because every person's situation is unique. I think patience is never a bad thing, and it's you can never be too compassionate and understanding and empathetic. At the same time, a lot of thought should certainly be given to the issue of rent. There are quite a lot of people still living, I think, on campus. I know one of them certainly doesn't really staying at home. For a lot of people, staying at home isn't an option. So, it's a big dilemma, and not one that I'm well poised to kind of judge or to make a sweeping statement on.
Yeah.
But I hope that everyone acts with decency and fairness to the situation, both on the university side and on the student side. I think that's right.
Definitely. Right, I think that's a cool place to call it a day. Thanks for coming on, man.
I've enjoyed it. Always a pleasure being on Off Script and just hanging out with you.
It's been good talking. I don't like doing these webcam things, though. I really find it hard, especially compared to being in like a studio and being able to see each other face to face. This is the second one I've done like this. I find it really hard.
Who was the chap you had on last week? I didn't recognise.
Harry Bates, who's from my politics seminar.
Okay.
He's a really fascinating guy.
Right.
Check out the podcast if you're interested.
Yeah. Oh, I can plug something as well if it's okay with you.
Yeah, please do for our 10 listeners.
Yeah, if you want to take the politics discussion further, I have a blog which Ollie is going to put in the description, aren't you, Ollie?
Am I?
Yeah.
Up here, over here, down here. Where will it
And
be?
if you click the subscribe button over there, then you can no. But it's the address is the poorlyinformedblog.blogspot.co.uk. It's linked to a podcast I and some friends have done in the past. The podcast is still going, but that's a separate issue. But I'm posting on there fairly regularly at the moment. Got not much else on. So recently, for instance, I dropped a massive thing looking at every prime minister since World War II, kind of a brief guide to each of them, what they did, what the policies were, how they impacted Britain. I've been putting out some pandemic-related stuff before then. So yeah, go check that out. I'd really appreciate it. I'm getting thousands of views at the moment, so you can be part of that little community. Okay, I've been very careful in my wording. In total, over all time, I've got 2,500 views. So technically,
Oh, wow.
I'm getting thousands of views.
Thousands. That's thousands.
No, okay, I've got 100 this month already. So that's so be part of that little community. Do go check that out, and the link is in the description. I have good fun writing those. So,
and I'm sure after this you'll be getting thousands more hits.
Thousands more, yeah. I'll plug your podcast, mate. It goes two ways. I'll point people. Yeah.
Awesome. Right, sweet. Take care, man. Wash your hands. Stay safe.
I've been touching my facial podcast. I should really stop that. Stay safe, and I'm sure we'll talk again soon.
Right, sweet. Take care, man.
See you later, man.